Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we continue our look at April, May, and June, the second quarter of 1973. We'll look at television, the news, what the Beach Boys were up to, and let's get started right away with a look at movies. Released on April 7th was Clint Eastwood, starring in and directing the Western High Plains Drifter. It'll be number 1 at the box office for 2 weeks beginning May 30th. Released on April 10th was The Class of 44, a sequel to The Summer of 42, released in 1971. On April 11th came Gene Hackman and Al Pacino starring in the realist drama Scarecrow, which will top the box office the week of June 27th. Opening in wide release on May 9th was Paper Moon, starring Ryan O'Neal and introducing his real-life daughter Tatum as a grifter and his young charge in the 1930s. Filmed in glorious, panoramic black and white, it was a film you could enjoy for the acting and storyline, or just for the outstanding cinematography and art direction. The film will reach the number 1 spot at the box office on August 22nd, and again on August 24th. Also going into wide release on May 9th was Soylent Green. Charlton Heston in another science fiction film following Planet of the Apes in 1968 and The Omega Man in 1971. Soylent Green presented an overpopulated, polluted future that was utterly bleak and nihilistic. The film's outlook was so hopeless that by comparison, I'd have much preferred the Omega Man's world of zombie vampires or even a planet of damn dirty apes. The movie also featured the great Edward G. Robinson in what turned out to be his final film role. He had passed away on January 26, 1973. The film will be a success, hitting number 1 at the box office for 2 weeks beginning April 25th. Tom Laughlin's 1971 film Billy Jack was re-released on May 9th. With the wave of popular martial arts movies in the US, the timing was perfect. The film seems to have been an influence in some part in the creation of the Kung Fu TV series in 1972. The popularity of the TV series had helped launch the martial arts movie craze. Now Billy Jack could reap what it had sown. It reportedly made $10 million on its initial run in 1971. The re-release will reportedly make $50 million and will be number 1 at the box office for 3 consecutive weeks beginning October 31st. After grabbing a lot of attention in support and featured roles, mainly in women in prison pictures over the last few years, Pam Grier stars as Coffee, released on May 11th, the baddest one-chick hit squad that ever hit town. It was an American International Pictures release. It'll be number 1 at the box office the week of August 18th. On May 23rd came Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, starring James Coburn, Chris Christopherson, and Bob Dylan as Alias. Bob Dylan also provided the soundtrack for the film. Premiering on May 28th was Let the Good Times Roll. Riding a growing wave of nostalgia for the 1950s, the film mixed archival clips from the 50s with 70s concert footage of Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Little Richard, Bill Haley, Fats Domino, and many more. At the time, it was noticeable how much the players had aged. Now, they all seem relatively young in the early 70s and still very much able to bring the goods in concert. On June 15th came Battle for the Planet of the Apes, the 5th film in the Planet of the Apes franchise. It was billed as the final film in the series. The movies had generally been going downhill with lower budgets and production values with each successive film. The low budget of Battle for the Planet of the Apes is evident right from the poster art. This one was aimed squarely at kids, teaching us the important lesson, ape shall never kill ape. The battle was especially anticlimactic. The filmmakers pulled out all the film school tricks, trying to make the ultra-low-budget battle look bigger than it was. Never show the opposing forces in the same shot so you can use your extras in both armies. Group the few actors around to fill the frame. Keep the shots tight and the edits quick so nobody gets a really good look. Add a lot of smoke. And if you can only afford one explosion, film it from a lot of different angles and edit it to look like multiple explosions. I think we see one treehouse blowing up about a dozen times during the course of the battle. Premiering on June 20th was A Touch of Class, a romantic comedy starring George Segal and Glenda Jackson. Opening that same day was Shaft in Africa, starring Richard Roundtree. Another new addition in another film franchise, it was the third Shaft film in as many years. On June 27th, we got Scream, Blacula, Scream. Unsurprisingly, AIP quickly turned out a sequel to last year's profitable Blacula. Also unsurprisingly, the sequel wasn't quite as good as the original, though this one did feature emerging fan favorite Pam Grier. Also opening on June 27th was Live and Let Die. Bond was back. After 1971's Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery hung up the role for a second time. The new Bond was Roger Moore, who, it was noted, brought more humor to the role. His performance was generally well received, certainly much better than George Lazenby had been received in 1969. Though most people preferred Connery, if we couldn't have him, it was generally felt that Moore was the second best choice, kind of making him the Shemp Howard of James Bonds. Unusually, it was a summer release for a Bond film, which had become something of a holiday event over the years. It'll also be the biggest hit of the summer, topping the box office for the entire month of July and again for the week of August 8th. The film featured Jane Seymour and actor Jeffrey Holder, who was well known to most Americans around this time as the Uncola Nut guy from 7-Up commercials. Turning to television in the second quarter, on April 4th, Elvis Presley Aloha from Hawaii via satellite was broadcast in the U.S. The concert had been performed on January 14, 1973, and broadcast live to Asia and Oceania. It was broadcast to Europe a short time later. In the U.S., the broadcast had been delayed until April 4th to avoid scheduling it against Super Bowl VII between Miami and Washington, which was played in Los Angeles on the same day as the concert, and to avoid conflicting with the Elvis on Tour film, which was still playing in theaters early in the year. The album had already been out for about 2 months. All of this kind of blunted the immediacy of the event for U.S. audiences. Still, the special drew high ratings, and as mentioned last time, the album will go all the way to number 1 on May 5th. For some very interesting background on the Aloha from Hawaii concert, check out George Fairbrother's comments on episode 185 U.S. Pop Culture 1986 Part 7. The subject came up because the Elvis special's director, Marty Pasetta, would direct another concert special from Hawaii, the Beach Boys 25 Years Together, 13 years later in 1986. On April 16th, Paul McCartney's television special, James Paul McCartney, airs on ABC. His second album with Wings, Red Rose Speedway, will be released 2 weeks later. On May 17th, the Senate's Watergate committee hearings begin airing on daytime television and will continue until August 7th. One of the committee's big moments will come on June 25th, when former White House aide John Dean testifies that Nixon had actively participated in the Watergate cover-up beginning shortly after the break-in and had been involved in political espionage for years. He says that he had warned the president that many in the administration had already obstructed justice and that there was a, quote, cancer growing on the White House. Also in news that second quarter, on April 8th, Pablo Picasso, probably the most celebrated artist of the 20th century, dies at the age of 91. With the final manned moon landing having taken place in December 72, NASA moves into a new phase with the launch of Skylab, America's first orbital space station, on May 14th. It was described as being the size of a 3-bedroom house, and was, at the time, the largest thing ever launched into space by man. Skylab is damaged during launch and deployment, leaving the solar panels not working properly and the station with a huge power deficit. Skylab's first crew is supposed to follow 1 day later. Their launch is delayed while damage is assessed and workarounds devised. The crew is launched 11 days later on May 25th. They're able to make repairs, get power levels up, and make the station habitable. The crew will return to Earth on June 22nd after 28 days in space, twice as long as any other U.S. crew so far. On May 25th, legal scholar Archibald Cox is sworn in as U.S. Special Prosecutor to investigate the Watergate matter and all offenses arising out of the 1972 election involving the President, the White House staff, or presidential appointments. On June 9th, Secretariat wins the Belmont Stakes, becoming the first to win horse racing's Triple Crown since Citation in 1948. And what were the Beach Boys up to in the spring of 1973? Their latest North American tour, which had begun in late March, continued until May 20th, when it wound up with a show in Athens, Ohio. The touring group will take an extended break after that. On April 6th, the American Spring single Shyin' Away and Fallin' in Love, produced by Brian Wilson and David Sandler, is released. The A-side, Shyin' Away, is co-written by David Sandler, Brian Wilson, and Diane Ravel. The B-side, Fallin' in Love, is a slight rewrite of Dennis Wilson's song Lady. As nice a single as it is, it fails to chart. We discussed it in detail back in episode 46, American Spring. On April 16th, California Saga, On My Way to Sunny California, backed with Funky Pretty, is released in the US. It'll spend 4 weeks on the Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 84 on June 2nd. On April 20th, the Beach Boys play their first hometown concert in nearly 2 years at the Hollywood Palladium. Among other notables in the audience are Murray and Audrey Wilson. Former Beach Boy Bruce Johnston joins the group on stage for the encore. Brian also appears, occasionally wandering out on stage, and briefly joins in the encore singing a few lines of Barbara Ann. It'll end up being his last stage appearance until 1976. The show goes down well despite a few technical problems and rough edges. It's recorded for a possible live album. Ultimately, 2 tracks from the show, Sail on Sailor and Sloop John B., will be used to kick off the Beach Boys in Concert album. Photos from the show are also used on the album cover and inner sleeve. Though the group and Jack Riley have been promising in the press for some time that Smile would soon be finished, either by finishing the original tapes or completely re-recording it, on May 1st, the contractual deadline for the Beach Boys to present Smile to their label Warner Reprise passes with no album delivered. As stipulated, the label holds back $50,000 from the group's royalties. I can understand that no one in the group was probably too eager to revisit such a fraught period of their relatively recent past. Also, with the buildup about the album, and the grand concept albums that had been released by others in the last few years, maybe they thought Smile would now inevitably be seen as a letdown. Possibly in 1973, $50,000 was a small price to pay to keep the mystery and the legend alive. On June 4th, 1973, Murray Wilson, the father of Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson, dies suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 55. A despondent Brian and Marilyn go to New York. Dennis goes off to Europe. Seemingly, neither one of them can face the funeral. Carl is the only one of Murray's sons to attend. When Brian returns from New York in mid-June, he reportedly begins spending more time in bed and goes into a rapid downward spiral with drugs and alcohol. And on those somber notes, we will leave the second quarter of 1973. I hope you found this interesting. As always, I look forward to your feedback. Next time, we will move on to the second half of 1973. I hope you'll join us for that. Please hit like if you don't mind and subscribe if you haven't. I always appreciate that. Have a great week. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.